My straight childhood rival became my tutor. Then he found my hidden sketchbook gay love story. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you enjoy emotional gay love stories with romance, powerful twists, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing viewers from all over the world. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into today's story. Edit: the day Logan Brooks opens my sketchbook is the day I lose the only secret I've ever managed to keep. I used to believe every person had one thing they would protect no matter what. Some people hid old love letters. Some buried embarrassing childhood photos in dusty boxes in the attic. Me? I carried mine everywhere in a battered black sketchbook with worn corners and graphite smudges across the cover. It never left my backpack, never sat unattended, never wandered farther than an arm's length from me. If anyone asked why I was so protective of it, I always laughed it off and said it was because I wanted to apply to art school someday. That wasn't exactly a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 18 years old, and I've spent almost half my life drawing the same purse. My mother invited Logan inside, as if she had personally discovered the solution to every problem in my life. She smiled, thanked him for agreeing to help, and disappeared into the kitchen to make hot chocolate before either of us could object. I stood in the hallway clutching my backpack so tightly that my shoulders already hurt. Logan glanced around our house with quiet curiosity before looking back at me. "Nice place," he said. "Feels different from when we were kids." I raised an eyebrow. "You remember being here?" "A couple of times." He shrugged. "Birthday parties. School projects. Nothing dramatic." "Good," I muttered. "I would hate to discover you have been keeping detailed records." He laughed and followed me upstairs to my room, where my desk sat beneath a wide window overlooking the backyard. Sketches of landscapes and old movie posters covered one wall, carefully chosen because they revealed nothing personal. Before Logan could step farther inside, I quietly slid my backpack beneath the desk with my foot. He glanced down at the movement, then back at me. "Should I be worried?" he asked with a faint grin. "Only if you plan on stealing my calculus homework. Considering the condition of your calculus homework, I think I am safe." I stared at him. "You have been here 30 seconds, and you are already insulting me." Constructive criticism. His smile grew slightly, but he let the subject drop. We opened my calculus textbook, and for the next hour something unexpected happened. Logan was actually a good teacher. He never made me feel stupid when I missed a problem. He explained formulas 3 different ways until one finally made sense. When I solved a difficult equation correctly, he smiled with genuine satisfaction instead of smug victory. It was infuriating. I had spent years convincing myself that Logan enjoyed beating me. Sitting across from him now, watching him patiently erase mistakes and encourage me to try again, that version of him did not quite fit anymore. During a short break, my mother knocked on the door with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate and a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "You boys must be hungry," she said cheerfully before leaving us alone again. Logan picked up a cookie and took a bite. "Okay, these are dangerously good. Do not encourage her," I said. "She will send you home with 20. I failed to see the problem. I laughed despite myself. It was strange how easy the moment felt. No competition. No score to settle. Just 2 people sitting across from each other sharing cookies while rain clouds gathered beyond the window. For years I had remembered Logan mostly as the person whose name always seemed to appear one place above mine. I had forgotten what it felt like simply to talk to him. Before I could think too much about that realization, my phone buzzed with a message from my best friend, Noah. "Is the legendary Logan Brooks really tutoring you tonight?" I typed back one word. "Unfortunately." Logan glanced toward the sound, but politely looked away. "Good news?" he asked. "Noah." Making fun of me. Then probably excellent news for Noah. I gave him an unimpressed look, and he laughed. A few minutes later, while I searched through a drawer for an extra pencil, Logan's attention drifted toward the sketches covering my wall. "You still draw?" he asked casually. My hand stopped for half a second before I forced myself to keep searching. "Sometimes. They are good. They are mostly old. Still good." There was no deeper question attached to the compliment. No strange look. No suggestion that he remembered something I did not. He simply picked up his pencil and returned to the unfinished equation between us. Somehow that made the compliment harder to ignore. By the time we finished the lesson, the sky outside had turned dark. Logan packed his notebook and worksheets into his backpack while I walked him downstairs. Same time Wednesday? He asked at the door. Assuming I survive until then. You will. Very confident. I am an excellent tutor. There it is. I knew the ego was hiding somewhere. Logan laughed before stepping onto the porch. I watched until he disappeared down the driveway, then went back upstairs and closed my bedroom door. Only then did I pull the battered black sketchbook from beneath the desk. I opened it just enough to see the first familiar portrait before closing it again. Tonight had been dangerous in a way I had not expected. Not because Logan had come close to discovering my secret, but because for the first time in years, I had enjoyed having him close. And that felt like a much harder secret to protect. The tutoring sessions settled into a routine so quickly that I almost forgot they had started as my personal nightmare. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 6 o'clock, Logan appeared on our front porch carrying the same dark backpack, the same notebook filled with perfectly organized lesson plans, and the same calm smile that somehow never looked forced. I kept expecting him to slip back into the competitive boy I remembered, the one who always seemed one step ahead of me. But instead he patiently walked me through equations, practice tests, and impossible homework assignments until numbers finally stopped looking like a foreign language. The strangest part was not that he was helping me. The strangest part was that he seemed to enjoy spending time with me. We still teased each other, of course. That had become its own strange language. Whenever I solved a problem before he finished explaining it, I would grin and tell him he was losing his touch. He would shake his head, laugh quietly, and remind me that I had only answered correctly because he had spent 20 minutes teaching me the method first. Somehow those little exchanges felt less like battles and more like habits neither of us wanted to break. My grades slowly climbed, and my mother looked happier every week. She kept thanking Logan as though he had rescued the entire Carter family from academic disaster. He always answered with the same polite smile and insisted I was doing all the work myself. I rolled my eyes every time he said it, but secretly I appreciated that he never tried to take credit. One Friday evening, after we finished another practice test, the rain finally stopped outside. We walked to the corner convenience store for cold drinks before heading home. We argued over which flavor of chips was objectively the best, laughed when neither of us could convince the other, and ended up buying both. On the walk back, Logan told me about accidentally setting off the smoke alarm while trying to make pancakes for his younger cousin. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my drink. You? Burning pancakes? I asked. He looked offended. It was one time. You always seem like the kind of person who succeeds at everything. Trust me, he said with a grin. My family still brings it up every Thanksgiving. The conversation drifted naturally from embarrassing childhood stories to favorite movies, terrible teachers, and places we wanted to visit after graduation. For the first time in years, I forgot we had ever been rivals. We were simply two teenagers walking home before sunset, enjoying the kind of ordinary conversation I never imagined we would share. Still, there was one thing I refused to let change. The sketchbook never left my sight. If I went to refill my water bottle, it came with me. If I needed to grab another textbook downstairs, it disappeared into my backpack first. Logan noticed the routine after about 2 weeks. That book must be pretty important, he joked one evening while organizing flashcards across my desk. You carry it around like it is part of your homework. I shrugged, trying to sound casual. Old habit. Fair enough. He smiled and returned to the lesson without asking another question. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. A few days later we met at the public library because my house was getting noisy while my aunt visited from Chicago with her 2 energetic kids. The library smelled like old paper and fresh coffee from the cafe near the entrance. We claimed our usual table beside the tall windows where afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished floor. While Logan reviewed practice questions, I drifted for a moment, watching people move between the shelves. An elderly man searched the history section. 2 little girls whispered over a stack of picture books. Everything felt peaceful until Logan suddenly asked, "Can I ask you something?" I looked back at him. Depends how embarrassing it is. He smiled. Fair enough. Why did you stop entering art competitions? My pencil froze above the page. I had not entered one since sophomore year. Hardly anyone remembered that except my parents and a few teachers. How do you even know that? I asked quietly. Logan hesitated for a moment before answering. I remember seeing your name a couple of times back then. Then one year it was gone. His answer sounded simple, almost casual, yet it lingered in my mind longer than it should have. Before I could think of a reply, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder about next month's regional student art exhibition. Without realizing it, I locked the screen almost immediately. Logan noticed the movement, but politely looked away instead of asking about it. He simply gathered the worksheets, smiled gently, and suggested we call it a day. As we packed our bags, I caught myself wondering whether Logan understood me better than I had expected. The thought should have made me nervous. Instead, for reasons I could not explain, it made the walk home feel a little less lonely. The following Wednesday started like every other tutoring night, which should have warned me that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. Rain tapped softly against my bedroom window while Logan sat across from me explaining derivatives with the patience of someone who had long ago accepted that I would never stop making dramatic complaints about math. Numbers should come with warning labels. I grumbled after getting another practice question wrong. Logan laughed, a quiet sound that somehow made the room feel warmer. You say that every lesson. Because it is still true. He slid the worksheet back toward me. Try the last step again. You already know the answer. You just stopped trusting yourself. I sighed, rubbed my forehead, and reached for my calculator. Halfway through the equation, my mother called from downstairs. Ethan, could you help me carry the grocery bags? I glanced toward the door. I will be right back. Logan nodded without looking up from the textbook. Take your time. Normally, I would have grabbed my backpack before leaving the room. Normally, I would have made absolutely certain the sketchbook was safely hidden inside. Normally. Instead, distracted by the rain, the homework, and my mother's increasingly impatient voice, I hurried downstairs with nothing except my phone in my pocket. It took less than 5 minutes to bring in the groceries. 5 ordinary minutes. I carried 2 bags into the kitchen, listened to my mother tell me about a sale on apples, answered a text from Noah asking if I wanted to watch the basketball game on Friday, and then headed back upstairs. The moment I stepped into the hallway outside my bedroom, something felt wrong. The room was completely quiet. Too quiet. Logan was standing beside my desk instead of sitting in his chair. My backpack rested on the floor. Unzipped. My heart dropped so fast it almost hurt. Logan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked toward me immediately. There was something unreadable in his expression, not shock, not amusement, not pity. Just stillness. In his hands was my black sketchbook. Time seemed to fold. Inward. Every sound disappeared except the rain tapping gently against the glass. I crossed the room so quickly that my shoulder bumped against the desk. Give it back, I said, reaching for it. Logan did not pull away. He simply closed the cover carefully before holding it out to me. I was looking for another sheet of graph paper, he said quietly. It slipped out when I moved your backpack. I grabbed the sketchbook and held it against my chest like it might disappear. My hands were trembling. You read it. It was not a question. Logan lowered his eyes for a brief second before meeting mine again. I saw enough. My face burned with embarrassment. Every page I had spent years hiding flashed through my mind. Pencil portraits of Logan reading beneath a tree in middle school. Logan laughing after winning a debate tournament. Logan standing on the football field at sunset. Dozens of moments he probably never even realized I had noticed. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. I wanted to rewind 5 minutes. I wanted to become invisible. Instead, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us until it almost became another person standing in the room. Finally, Logan inhaled slowly and asked in the gentlest voice I had ever heard from him. Ethan, have you really been drawing me all these years? Logan did not look away. That was somehow the hardest part. If he had laughed, I could have hated him again. If he had looked disgusted, I could have slammed the sketchbook shut and spent the rest of my life pretending none of it had happened. Instead, he simply stood there with the same quiet expression that had slowly replaced every memory I thought I had of him. My throat felt too tight to answer. I stared at the worn cover pressed against my chest and wished I could disappear into the floorboards. Say something, I whispered, though I was not even sure whether I meant him or myself. Logan nodded almost imperceptibly. I will, he said. But first, I need you to know I am sorry. I looked up. Sorry, I should not have opened it. His voice stayed calm. It was an accident, but I still crossed a line. That apology landed somewhere I had built walls around. Years ago, I had expected questions. I had expected awkwardness. I had expected the kind of uncomfortable silence that changes everything forever. I had not expected respect. I let out a shaky breath. You saw enough, I admitted. Enough to understand. Another silence settled between us, softer this time. Rain continued tapping against the window, gentle and steady, as if the entire world had decided to whisper instead of speak. Logan reached into his backpack without breaking eye contact. My heart skipped. For one terrifying second, I thought he was about to pull out one of my drawings. Instead, he placed a small weathered cardboard box on my desk. It looked old, the corners softened by time, the lid held shut with fading blue painter's tape. He rested one hand on top of it. There is something you should see. I frowned. What is that? He gave a nervous smile that I had never seen before. Logan Brooks was nervous. The realization alone almost made me forget my own embarrassment. Open it, he said quietly. My hands hesitated before setting the sketchbook aside. I peeled back the tape and lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of loose sheets of drawing paper, some crisp, some yellowed with age, all carefully stacked together. The first page stopped my breathing. It was me, 11 years old, sitting beneath the giant maple tree behind Jefferson Elementary with a comic book balanced on my knees. I remembered that afternoon. I had no idea anyone had been watching. I turned another page. Me carrying a backpack nearly as big as I was on the first day of middle school. Another. Me laughing with Noah outside the football stadium. Another. Me asleep on a bus during our sophomore class trip, my head against the window with sunlight across my face. Every drawing captured a moment I never knew someone had noticed. Every line felt familiar, patient, careful. These are yours? I asked, my voice barely audible. Logan nodded. All of them. I kept turning the pages, slower now, as though moving too quickly might somehow prove I was imagining all of it. Every sketch carried a different date tucked quietly into one corner. 5th grade, 7th grade, freshman year, sophomore year. They stretched across so many years that my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. No, I whispered, more to myself than to him. This does not make sense. Logan remained silent, giving me space instead of rushing to explain. I looked back at the drawings, searching desperately for something that would make this easier to understand. Maybe he had only started recently. Maybe these were assignments from art class. Maybe there was another explanation hiding somewhere between the pages. But every date, every careful pencil stroke, every familiar memory quietly erased those excuses one by one. I swallowed hard before looking up at him again. You kept all of these? My voice cracked on the last word. Logan nodded once. I almost threw them away more than once, he admitted. Every time I told myself it was ridiculous. Every time I ended up putting them back in the box. I stared at him, unable to reconcile the confident, composed person standing in front of me with the quiet boy who had apparently been carrying his own secret for years. My heartbeat pounded so loudly that I barely noticed the rain outside anymore. All this time, I said slowly, I thought I was the only one hiding something. Logan gave a small, almost helpless smile. So did I. I lowered my eyes to the sketches again. They were not rushed doodles or casual practice drawings. Every portrait had been observed with patience. Every memory had been preserved with care. Suddenly my own sketchbook no longer felt like a lonely confession. Somehow, without either of us realizing it, we had spent years telling the exact same story from opposite sides. My fingers tightened around one of the pages before I finally found the courage to ask, why? Logan looked down at his hands before answering. Because every time I tried to stop paying attention to you, he said softly, I somehow ended up noticing you even more. I stared at him, completely unable to speak. Everything I had believed for years began shifting beneath my feet. The rivalry I thought had defined our childhood suddenly looked different, as though I had spent my whole life staring at the back of a painting without realizing. There had always been another picture waiting on the other side. For the next few days, neither Logan nor I mentioned the box of drawings directly. Somehow, that made everything between us feel even louder. He still came over at 6 o'clock for tutoring. We still sat across from each other at my desk with calculus worksheets spread between us. He still corrected my mistakes without making me feel stupid, and I still complained that derivatives had been invented specifically to ruin my senior year. From the outside, nothing had changed. But every time I looked up and caught Logan already watching me, neither of us looked away quite as quickly as before. On Friday evening, we finished studying earlier than usual. Logan closed the textbook and leaned back in his chair while I pretended to organize pencils that were already perfectly organized. "Ethan," he said. I immediately knew the conversation I had been avoiding had finally arrived. "That sounds serious." "It is not." He paused. "At least I do not think it is." I looked at him. Logan nodded toward the calendar pinned beside my desk. The regional student art exhibition was circled in red. "You should enter." I almost laughed. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because I have not entered anything in 2 years." "That is not a reason." "It is an excellent reason." Logan shook his head. "No, it is an excuse." Normally I would have argued just because it was him saying it. This time I stayed quiet. He lowered his voice. "You know what I thought when I saw your sketchbook?" My stomach tightened. "Please do not answer that." "I thought you were brave." I stared at him. Of all the words I had imagined him using, brave had never been one of them. "I hid it from everyone," I said. "That is basically the opposite of brave." "Maybe, but you kept drawing anyway." Logan leaned forward slightly. "You cared about something enough to keep doing it, even when you were afraid anyone might see it." "I think that counts." I looked toward the window. Evening sunlight stretched across the backyard, turning the maple leaves gold around the edges. "What if I am not good enough?" I finally asked. Logan was quiet for a moment. "Then you enter." "Anyway." I glanced back at him. "That is terrible motivational advice." He smiled. "Probably. But you spent years thinking coming second meant losing. Maybe it is time you did something where winning is not the point." The words landed harder than I expected. For most of my childhood, Logan had been the person standing between me and first place. Now he was sitting across from me telling me that I did not need first place at all. I reached for the exhibition application on my desk. It had been sitting there for nearly 3 weeks, untouched except for the corner I occasionally lifted whenever I wanted to imagine being brave enough to complete it. Logan did not say anything as I picked up a pen. He simply reopened his calculus notebook and pretended to study. I smiled despite myself. "Do not make a big deal out of this." "Would not dream of it." I wrote my name on the first line. Logan kept his eyes on the notebook, but I saw the small smile appear at the corner of his mouth. And for once, instead of wondering whether I could ever catch up to Logan Brooks, I found myself wondering how far I might go with him quietly cheering beside me. The regional student art exhibition arrived faster than either of us expected. The old brick gallery downtown buzzed with teachers, families, local artists, and nervous students pretending they were not checking every reaction to their work. White walls stretched beneath warm lights, each painting carefully spaced as though every piece deserved its own quiet conversation. Mine hung near the back corner, exactly where I had requested. I liked corners. Corners did not ask questions. Logan stood beside me with his hands tucked into the pockets of his navy jacket, scanning the room while I tried to convince myself that my heartbeat sounded completely normal. "You are going to do great," he said. "You have said that 6 times. Because you still do not believe me." I looked toward my painting instead of answering. It was not a portrait of Logan, at least not obviously. The figure faced away from the viewer beneath an autumn maple tree, sunlight breaking through orange leaves while a sketchbook rested on one knee. Anyone else would. See an anonymous student. I knew better. Logan knew better. That secret somehow made the painting feel alive. Visitors drifted through the gallery, pausing, smiling, moving on. My art teacher introduced me to a retired illustrator who complimented my use of light. A little girl pointed at my painting and whispered that it looked peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. Then my phone vibrated. "Noah, where are you?" I turned toward the entrance, expecting to see him waving dramatically across the room. Instead, I noticed several students gathered near the registration desk, speaking in unusually excited voices. One of them held something black in his hands. My stomach dropped before my mind understood why. The sketchbook. My sketchbook. Somehow it was no longer inside my backpack. I did not remember taking it out after leaving home. Every page, every drawing, every year I had hidden inside those covers. My pulse roared in my ears. I started moving before I even realized my feet had left the floor. "Excuse me," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "That belongs to me." The student looked surprised. "Sorry, we found it on one of the benches. We thought maybe it was part of the exhibition because all the drawings are incredible." He smiled innocently and reached to hand it back. Before I could take it, another student leaned over his shoulder. "Wait," she said softly. "These are all the same guy." My hands froze inches from the cover. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Conversations blurred together into one distant hum. I imagined dozens of strangers turning those pages, recognizing Logan's face over and over, asking questions I could never answer. Heat rushed into my face. For one painful second, I convinced myself that Logan would wish he had never walked into my life. Maybe this was the moment he realized how strange all of it looked. Maybe he would politely distance himself, pretend the sketches meant nothing, and let everyone believe they were simply practice drawings. I could not bring myself to look at him. I stared at the floor instead, waiting for the silence to become unbearable. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt endless. Then I heard footsteps stop beside me. A warm, familiar voice broke through the panic. "He is right," Logan said. Every head turned toward him. He accepted the sketchbook carefully, closed it without letting anyone flip another page, and placed it gently into my hands. His fingers lingered on the worn cover for just a moment before he looked at the small crowd. There was no hesitation in his expression now, only quiet certainty. "Those drawings are personal," he said, "and I am honored that someone cared enough to spend so many years seeing me through an artist's eyes." Nobody spoke. One student quietly smiled before looking away. Another nodded with understanding and gently encouraged the others to give us some space. The curious whispers disappeared almost as quickly as they had begun. The room returned to the soft murmur of an ordinary gallery, as though the moment had quietly folded itself back into the evening. I looked at Logan, still unable to believe what had just happened. He had never denied the truth. He had never apologized for being the person inside those drawings. Instead, he had stepped forward without being asked and carried part of the weight I had been trying to bear alone for years. My grip on the sketchbook loosened for the first time since I had started carrying it everywhere. Standing there beside him, surrounded by paintings and strangers who had already moved on, I realized the secret I had spent years protecting no longer felt like something that needed to be hidden. It had become a story we were both willing to stand beside. Logan met my eyes and offered the smallest smile, one that seemed to say everything neither of us could find words for. I smiled back before either of us looked away, and for the first time since I had opened that battered sketchbook years ago, I felt lighter than the pages it contained. The applause that afternoon faded long before the memory did. I did not win first place at the exhibition. I came in second, which somehow felt strangely perfect. For most of my life, I had treated second place like proof that I was never enough. This time, standing beside Logan with a ribbon in one hand and my sketchbook safely tucked beneath my arm, it felt different. I was no longer measuring my life against someone else's finish line. A week later, we graduated beneath a cloudless June sky. Blue gowns fluttered in the warm breeze. Cameras flashed from every direction, and proud families cheered so loudly that the principal's speech disappeared beneath the noise. Logan crossed the stage a few names before mine. As always, people clapped a little louder for him. As always, he smiled politely. But when I walked across the stage, I caught him applauding harder than anyone else. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. Yet somehow it meant more than every trophy we had ever competed for. Life moved forward the way it always does. Logan accepted an engineering scholarship at a university 2 hours away. I enrolled in one of the best illustration programs in the state. The distance sounded intimidating at first, but somehow it never became a wall. We traded late-night phone calls, terrible selfies from campus libraries, photos of terrible cafeteria food, and endless voice messages whenever one of us needed encouragement before an exam. Sometimes we studied together over video calls without saying much at all. Silence no longer felt uncomfortable between us. It felt like home. During my second year of college, I received an email inviting me to hold my first small gallery exhibition featuring personal sketches collected over the years. The curator asked if there was one piece that meant the most to me, something that represented why I had become an artist. I did not hesitate. I knew exactly which drawing belonged at the center of the room. Opening night arrived on a cool October evening. Guests wandered quietly through the gallery, pausing beneath soft lights as they studied landscapes, city streets, portraits, and memories turned into charcoal and watercolor. Near the final wall stood a glass display case containing my old black sketchbook. The corners were still worn. The cover still carried faint graphite fingerprints from years ago. It was no longer something I wanted to hide. It had become proof of the person I used to be and the courage it took to become someone new. Logan arrived a little late after driving through weekend traffic. I spotted him the moment he stepped inside. He looked around the gallery with the same quiet smile I had come to know so well before stopping in front of the display case. He laughed softly when he recognized the earliest drawings, shaking his head as though he could hardly believe they had survived all these years. I walked over beside him without saying a word. Together we turned to the very last page. It no longer held an unfinished sketch. Years earlier, after that rainy evening in my bedroom, Logan had borrowed one of my pencils while I was making coffee downstairs. When I came back, he had added a single drawing beside my signature. It was simple. Two boys sitting beneath a maple tree with sketchbooks balanced on their knees, both smiling toward the same horizon instead of facing each other like rivals. Underneath, in neat handwriting, he had written only one sentence. "Thank you for seeing me before I learned how to see myself." I closed the sketchbook gently and slipped my hand into his. This time neither of us looked away. Neither of us needed to ask what came next. Logan took a small step closer, giving me every chance to move away if I wanted to. I did not. My free hand lightly brushed against his sleeve before I looked into the same warm eyes that had quietly followed me through so many seasons of my life. He smiled, almost shyly, and I felt myself smiling back. Then he leaned in, slow enough for my heartbeat to catch up, and our lips met in a gentle, lingering kiss. It was soft, unhurried, and wonderfully ordinary. There were no cheering crowds, no dramatic music, no perfect timing worthy of a movie. Just two people who had spent years hiding the exact same feelings finally allowing themselves to stop pretending. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together for a quiet moment. Logan let out a small laugh. "I guess we wasted a lot of time," he whispered. I laughed too, brushing away the tears gathering in my eyes. "Maybe," I answered, "but we still found our way here." He squeezed my hand once more, and somehow that simple gesture felt every bit as meaningful as the kiss itself. Outside the gallery, autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk exactly like they had years before behind our elementary school. Back then I thought every drawing had been about the boy I could never catch. Looking back now, I realized every page had quietly been leading me toward the person who had been walking beside me all along.